Good afternoon. I think it's afternoon. The Subcommittee on State Foreign Operations and Related Programs will come to order. Chairman Reed, Acting Director Hardy, CEO Bowler. Thank you all for joining us today. Unfortunately, the administration has once again signaled its ill-advised and irresponsible approach to foreign affairs by proposing a nearly 20% cut to foreign assistance. At a time when actors do not share our values, like China and Russia, are increasingly influencing foreign development assistance, this proposal, if implemented, would be disastrous with no coherent strategy. The budget request demonstrates that the administration does not grasp the impact of global development on our own national security, nor the benefit of efforts that promote economic growth while engaging American companies. Though the administration touts increases to private sector engagement in global development, the budget proposes exorbitant increases to some programs, while cutting or even completely eliminating others that are proven to have a substantial role in engaging the private sector to invest in risky emerging markets. The administration's proposed shutdown of the U.S. Trade Development Agency is one example of the lack of understanding by the administration, and I clearly do not support this proposal. U.S. TDA facilitates opportunities for U.S. companies that promote sustainable development across the globe and levels the playing field, thereby increasing exports for American companies of all sizes and jobs for American workers. Further, the agency has secured a $111 return on investment for every dollar spent. That's $111 in U.S. exports for every dollar invested in emerging markets. It does not make sense, in my judgment, to halt USTDA's ability to provide such results, which achieve strategic foreign assistance objectives and indeed put America first. EXIM Bank also supports these priorities and helps American companies and small businesses export abroad through financing support and also by reducing the risk for U.S. goods and services to compete in overseas markets. In fiscal year 2019, nearly 90% of EXIM's transactions supported small businesses. This promotes job creation and global competitiveness for local American businesses. And now that EXIM is reauthorized through 2026, and has a quorum restoring EXIM to its full financing capacity, I'm interested in strengthening its ability to ramp up support for U.S. business overseas. I've been proud to support the United States International Development Finance Corporation, along with colleagues from both sides of the aisle. However, I'm concerned that a 288%, you hear that? 288% increase for a consolidated account line that includes the DFC's equity finance program may be too much too soon. The DFC has only been operational for 3 months, and for this committee to further invest in a new institution, we must see evidence of success, which will take time. Building a sustainable institution must be done strategically and with consideration to lessons learned through past efforts. the context of evolving markets and related needs, and data-driven programming. The President's budget proposal focuses on the short term and would both hurt American businesses and damage our local standing. This is particularly concerning now as the spread of coronavirus has disrupted markets and the potential for future shock exists. Fortunately, this committee recognizes that strong, sustained U.S. leadership combined with a global effort that leverages private sector resources toward sustainable development helps open global market opportunities. The complementary efforts of USTDA, XM, and DFC are critical to this process. This is why I would like to see all of them succeed, which requires adequate resources and thoughtful policy. As chairwoman, I have every expectation that we will produce a bill that maximizes each taxpayer dollar while maintaining responsible investment in export and financing efforts that promote U.S. businesses while supporting sustainable global development. Before we move to your testimonies, let me turn to Mr. Rogers, the ranking member, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Baylor, Chairman Reed, Director Hardy, welcome to the Subcommittee on State and Foreign Operations. This hearing involves important agencies of the government that are at the junction of development policy and commercial diplomacy. Nearly 2 decades ago, a distinguished American diplomat wrote that the position of the United States as, quote, the best place in the world to do business, the most reliable in which to buy, the most lucrative in which to sell, and the safest and surest in which to invest or raise capital, is the cause, not an effect, of American global leadership, end quote. He went on to say that protecting and expanding the U.S. role as the world's supplier and customer of choice for goods and services, ideas, capital, and entrepreneurial energy should be a foreign policy objective second only to securing the homeland. That statement is even more true, I think, today. The global economy has undergone a dramatic transformation in recent decades, with U.S. competitors using comprehensive national strategies to promote trade and investment through robust export and project finance, extensive technical assistance, and strong political backing from their national governments. We need look no farther than China's ambitious Belt and Road Initiative, with its aggressive use of government financing for infrastructure development in emerging markets, to see the clear relationship between commercial diplomacy and U.S. national security. The Congress supported creation of the new U.S. Development Finance Corporation in large measure because of the growing geo-economic challenge from China. Another motivation was the realization that a more strategic approach was needed to address key U.S. development priorities, such as more effectively partnering with the private sector to expand economic opportunities in frontier markets. I look forward to discussing the changes in the DFC's program funding for this fiscal year, including financing of equity. I'm glad to see that another important tool of our economic statecraft, the U.S. Export-Import Bank, has a fully functioning board at last, and a new long-term authorization, because export credit agency financing is a powerful instrument used by other countries to gain competitiveness for their industry. In the absence of competitive private sector loans, financing from EXIM is often the critical factor in completing the deal. This is particularly true of smaller U.S. companies who may need assistance with supply chain finance. Technical assistance, grants from the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, such as for feasibility studies and technology training visits, is also a critical element of our ability to help U.S. companies build relationships with clients in challenging markets. Despite the proposed elimination of U.S. TDA in the budget request, key stakeholders continue to praise its technical assistance as an important tool to neutralize destructive practices by U.S. competitors. We appreciate the role all of your agencies play in helping to strengthen U.S. commercial competitiveness and advance our national interests abroad. We look forward to your testimony, and I yield back.
Unfortunately, we are called to vote, an important part of our responsibility, and I want to apologize in advance that I am going to have to stay on the floor because the supplemental will be coming to the floor. One of my colleagues will return, and she will have the pleasure of hearing your testimony with my other colleagues. So I'm going to adjourn.
Recess.
Oh, recess. I'm not adjourning. I'm going to recess. And did you vote? No. Some are on the floor now and are voting and coming up here. Thank you again in advance for appearing before us, and I look forward to reading your testimony. Thank you.
Okay, the hearing is called to order. Thank you very much for being here. I will be calling on members based on seniority of the members that were present when the hearing was called to order, and I will alternate between majority and minority. Each member is asked to keep their questions within 5 minutes per round. Acting Director, Chairman Reed, CEO, it's CEO Bowler, right? Bowler, excuse me. We'll be happy to place your full testimonies into the record. So if you'd be kind enough to summarize your oral statement, I want to make sure that we leave enough time for everyone's questions. So we'll begin with Acting Director, Mr. Hardy, and then Chairman Reed, and finishing with CEO Bowler. Thank you.
Vice Chair Lee, Ranking Member Rogers, members of the subcommittee, thank you very much for having me here today. It's my pleasure to be able to be here to talk about USTDA and its work around the world and the impact it is having both on our partners abroad and right here at home. As Chairwoman Lowy noted, the President's fiscal year 2021 budget proposes to eliminate funding for the U.S. Trade and Development Agency. As such, today's testimony, I want to focus on USTDA's statutory mission and what we are currently doing to advance our sustainable economic growth in our partner countries and how that is opening markets for U.S. goods and services in a dramatically changing and increasingly competitive international environment. As we all know, the American worker is the most productive, innovative, and dedicated the world has ever known. When given a fair opportunity, U.S. workers and U.S. companies compete and win anywhere. Too often, however, our products and workers are blocked by trade barriers that restrict market access or disadvantaged by subsidized foreign competition that creates an unfair playing field. Congress created USTDA under the Jobs for Exports Act to, quote, promote United States private sector participation in development projects in developing and middle-income countries with special emphasis on economic sectors with significant U.S. export potential, close quote. USTDA is therefore mandated to engage the private sector in infrastructure projects when technology options and project requirements are being defined. This early engagement ensures an honest and thorough evaluation of the impact on labor and the environment and the financial sustainability of all activities USTDA supports to ensure they can be financed on commercial terms. To accomplish our mission, the agency provides grants to overseas project sponsors to contract with American firms to undertake these project preparation activities. This funding may support a feasibility study, launch a pilot project, or support an array of technical assistance. USTDA also connects project sponsors with U.S. businesses through its reverse trade missions that bring foreign decision makers to the United States to see the design, manufacture, and operation of U.S. goods and services before a procurement decision is made. These activities produce results, as Chairman Lowy noted, for our foreign partners and U.S. industry. For every dollar USTDA invests in its project preparation activities, it is generating, on average, $111 in exports of U.S. goods and manufactured goods and services. This success is made possible by USTDA's ability to make a small investment up front that paves the way for financing of major infrastructure from the likes of the Export-Import Bank, the Development Finance Corporation, multilateral development banks, and regional lenders. Last summer, I was fortunate to see firsthand the real-world impacts of this investment, namely the opening of a cancer treatment center in Lagos, Nigeria. This resulted from a USTDA-hosted reverse trade mission for Nigerian hospital officials that introduced those officials to American healthcare technologies and these hospital officials were from the Lagos State Teaching Hospital. As a result of USTDA's early and targeted investment, the Sovereign Investment Authority financed the establishment of this world-class oncology center, this transforming cancer treatment in the most populous and largest country in Africa. As the President stated in his national security strategy, the United States must strengthen cooperation with allies on high-quality infrastructure. As a result, USTDA is utilizing its current appropriation and transfer funding from the Department of State to further open markets for U.S. companies and unlock infrastructure development opportunities. At the direction of the NSC, USTDA is working with Japan and other like-minded partners in new and unique ways to advance this quality infrastructure priority in line with the national security strategy. Critical to this effort is the administration's Indo-Pacific vision. Today, USTDA is utilizing its resources to advance this vision, which is responsive to our partners' needs for quality infrastructure solutions in the energy, transportation, healthcare, and ICT sectors. This work is directly countering China's Belt and Road Initiative. As you all know and have seen firsthand in your travel, the BRI poses serious economic and geopolitical challenges, not just for the United States, but for our partners around the world. As a result, USTDA is deploying all of our tools to support sustainable economic growth in our partner countries that provides a quality option and helps our partners and allies avoid China's debt trap diplomacy. This investment is laying the foundation for strong, stable states in the Indo-Pacific region and around the world, states capable of preventing conflict, states capable of managing crises, but perhaps most importantly, states capable of promoting prosperity. It's my pleasure and great privilege to lead the U.S. Trade and Development Agency and a staff that is dedicated to advancing and achieving these critically dual trade and development mandates. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
To Chairman Reed. Thank you.
Vice Chair Lee, Ranking Member Rogers, Representatives Torres, Frankel, Meng, and other members of this subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to discuss the President's fiscal year 2021 budget request for the Export-Import Bank of the United States. EXIM was established in 1934, and it is an immense honor to be the first woman and the first West Virginian to lead this agency. Since being confirmed on a strong bipartisan basis 10 months ago, we've been hard at work to fully reopen, reform, and reauthorize EXIM to provide results for our nation's workers while protecting the U.S. taxpayer. Now that we are back in full operation, we are very focused on communicating to all of our stakeholders in the United States and around the world that EXIM is now able to offer all of its financing options to support U.S. exports. EXIM, the official export credit agency of the United States, has the important mission of supporting American jobs by facilitating U.S. exports. Our vision is keeping America strong, empowering U.S. businesses and workers to compete globally. I love this mission and this vision, as the U.S. worker is at the heart of everything we do. The President's budget for EXIM requests an administrative budget of $100.9 million U.S., which will enable the agency to effectively administer its operations and continue the transition to full capacity by focusing on leveling the playing field for U.S. exporters, supporting our nation's small businesses, and minimizing risks to American taxpayers. The request also proposes restoring EXIM's administratively determined pay authority, which EXIM had up until 4 years ago to support the agency's efforts to attract and retain a talented EXIM workforce. AD pay is a very important tool to help us carry out our mission. When EXIM is fully operational, it is a self-financing agency because of the fees and interest it charges to the foreign buyers for the use of its programs. After paying its operating and program costs, EXIM has contributed a net of $9.4 billion to the U.S. Treasury since 1992. EXIM estimates that in FY2021, it will fully cover the cost of its administrative expenses, resulting in a net zero appropriation, and based on projections, will remit an estimated $610 million to the U.S. Treasury at the end of the fiscal year. In FY 2019, EXIM authorized $8.2 billion in financing that is estimated to support 30,000 American jobs. This was more than double the $3.3 billion in financing that EXIM authorized in 2018. We expect to build on that progress. In FY 2021, EXIM forecasts that the requested budget will enable the agency to support $20.9 billion in new authorizations, supporting approximately 159,000 jobs in districts like yours across the country. EXIM has averaged a default rate of less than 0.5% over the past decade as a result of strong underwriting, effective risk management, and due diligence exercised during the authorization process and post-authorization management of transactions. We achieved a major success for our nation's businesses and workers when Congress passed and the President signed into law on December 20th, 2019, a 7-year reauthorization of EXIM, the longest in EXIM's 86-year history. I am grateful for the strong support of our bipartisan leaders in Congress, including members of this committee, for this historic effort. This reauthorization provides important long-term certainty to the world so that American businesses of all sizes can compete and win in the very competitive global marketplace. We're beginning to implement the legislation and look forward to working with you as we continue to analyze the requirements and resource needs associated with full implementation of this landmark reauthorization. I briefly want to touch on some of the new congressional requirements included in EXIM's 2019 reauthorization. First, the law provides clear direction to EXIM to address the threat China poses to America's economic and national security. EXIM is working to establish a program to advance our country's comparative leadership in the world, directly neutralize competing Chinese export subsidies, and support American innovation and employment in 10 transformational industries, including wireless communications, 5G, biotechnology, and water sanitation, to name a few. Next, Congress has again called on EXIM to increase its financing to support small business exports, as well as those related to renewable energy, energy efficiency, and energy storage. We are passionate about this work and taking steps to better reach and educate more businesses that could benefit from EXIM. I'm excited to continue working with you and your staff in order to do great things on behalf of America's workers and help see more exports stamped with those 4 beautiful words, made in the USA. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Now, CEO Bowler. Thank you.
Vice Chairman Woman Lee, Ranking Member Rogers, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. The United States International Development Finance Corporation became operational on December 20th, 2019, propelled by bipartisan support in Congress and the support of the President. As a newly modernized agency, our mission is to invest with private sector partners to advance the interests of American people through development in emerging markets. Many of the nations that I've visited over the past 5 months face economic uncertainty and poverty. Despite incredible challenges, these countries and their people hold enormous potential. I've personally witnessed how unleashing the power of the private sector advances United States interests and transforms the lives of people throughout the world. I've also witnessed the great demand for a U.S. alternative from authoritarian governments. The BUILD Act enables the United States to be that alternative. DFC, with our private sector partners, are addressing the world's most critical development challenges by increasing access to water, closing the financing gap for women entrepreneurs, and building quality infrastructure. We're excited to take on this tremendous responsibility. A strong, well-resourced DFC complements and amplifies the foreign assistance efforts of our partner agencies, such as USAID, the Department of State, MCC, and my partners seated here next to me today. Together, we can foster sustainable economic growth and advance U.S. foreign policy interests. We work best when we work together. As we scale our operations to deliver on the BUILD Act's promises, the administration is requesting the resources necessary to make DFC's model of public-private partnerships an important tool of U.S. development and foreign policy. The total budget request is $836 million. The request consists of $136 million in administrative support, including a new Inspector General, Chief Development Officer, Chief Risk Officer, as well as $700 million for DFC programming. These requests reflect DFC's increased portfolio cap from $30 billion to $60 billion that was authorized by the BUILD Act, as well as the additional responsibilities requested by Congress. In addition to our legacy finance programs, the BUILD Act provides DFC with several new tools. Among the most important is Equity Authority. This greatly expands on our ability to deliver on the developmental and foreign policy goals that you have set forth. The BUILD Act also established new and important other priorities, such as feasibility studies and technical assistance. When Congress established DFC, it specifically included the word development in DFC's name to reinforce our core mission. The DFC is already making significant progress on our development mandate. We are creating a new state-of-the-art development scoring system called the Impact Quotient, or IQ score. We built this system with extensive input from the interagency and the broader development community. IQ will enable DFC to more accurately measure and monitor the development impact of every dollar that we invest. We are also expanding promising and proving programs, such as the 2X Women's Initiative. The 2017 National Security Strategy identified women's critical role in achieving global peace and stability. DFC is proud to support this commitment through WGDP, which seeks to economically empower 50 million women across the developing world by 2025. DFC is promoting economic opportunities for women around the world by expanding programs such as the Women's GDP 2X initiative, and we look forward to working with Congress as you seek to codify WGDP. I'm also pleased to announce that we hired our Chief Development Officer, Andy Herskowitz, who's behind me over there. Some of committee members may be familiar with him because he led Power Africa, and I work closely with Ambassador Green, with Bonnie Glick, to identify a candidate like Andy to take our development efforts forward. I'll close by noting that I really appreciate the foresight of Congress in passing the BUILD Act. The strong support of Congress indicates that investment in development is not a partisan issue, but an American priority. The U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, when combined together with our U.S. government partners, is an unparalleled tool for lifting people out of poverty and laying the groundwork for market-based economies across the world. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. Okay, I have a couple of questions for all three at this point. Each of your agencies I'd like to get the response. First of all of you promote private sector engagement in different ways. And so from your agency's work, what are some of the barriers for U.S. businesses to engage in abroad? And then sometimes there are business opportunities in areas where the private sector's capacity is limited due to governance issues. And so how do you handle that? Then the second question, of course, is around coronavirus in terms of how it's disrupted markets and caused upheaval in production and supply chains across multiple industries and sectors. So how does really a shock like this public health crisis affect your agency's work? And to date, have you seen an impact on private sector engagement from your agency's standpoint? And if possible, are there plans to mitigate the impact? Should we know, or should we be looking at something to support what those plans are? So we'll start with Director Hardy.
Thank you very much. I think the barriers that USTDA sees and the barriers that U.S. companies see are straightforward. They're China. We hear from our partners around the globe in the Western Hemisphere. Last week, Kim and I had breakfast with the ambassadors from the ASEAN countries. And our partner countries are looking for an alternative. They're looking for quality solutions that are built to last, that will provide long-term benefit to these countries. And China right now is investing overwhelming what the U.S. is doing on a dollar-for-dollar basis. But what the U.S. provides is quality and long-term solutions, and they're looking for that alternative. And we hear that from our partners around the world. And that is what's driving the demand for us right now. I will say just this past week, I had a really interesting conversation with a company manufacturer in Wisconsin who manufactures cranes and is retreating from the international market because they can't compete. China's state-run company is putting $100 million into local manufacturing of cranes in China, and they can't compete on a dollar-for-dollar basis. And they're coming to us saying, what can you do? What can the U.S. government do to be responsive? And this company's tagline is integrity, commitment to stakeholders, and passion for excellence. And right now, we're pulling our interagency together to figure out a solution. How can we help change this paradigm, not only with this one company, but around the world?
And on coronavirus?
Oh, on the coronavirus,
how's it affecting your agencies?
I think at this point it's much more at a agency level. We have travel restrictions now that's going to limit our ability to do outreach to develop our program. We haven't seen a direct impact on the private sector as of yet, but I think that there will be definitely direct and short-term impacts as travel restrictions continue to increase.
So are you all developing plans now, looking forward to this possibly happening to mitigate the impact, or are you waiting?
We have put into place travel restrictions that everything needs to be personally approved by senior management for any travel. We have obviously invested in the IT infrastructure that allows telecommunication, whether it simply be Skype calls. Our partners around the world are very frequently, we use those in our normal course of business. So we're just trying to look at different ways to achieve our mission that don't require us to be on the ground as much. It will be difficult, but it's something that we're prepared to implement.
Chairman Reed.
Thank you. Your question gets to the heart of what EXIM does, and I'm so thrilled that we're now fully reauthorized and giving the world certainty that we are around through 2026. When it comes to barriers in private sector capacity, EXIM comes in with those specific tools, such as export credit insurance, working capital guarantees, direct loans or loan guarantees to help our businesses compete. And some of those, when the private sector is able to compete and help our businesses win deals, we can come in and guarantee the loans that the private sector offers. But as Director Hardy mentioned, EXIM was not fully open for about four years. And when I became a nominee in 2017, there were about 90-some export credit agencies around the world. I even had one of them tell me to my face, "We're glad you're closed because we get your jobs." And so when I finally was confirmed 10 months ago, there are now 113 export credit agencies around the world. And China has 2 formal, 1 informal one. And China does more than the G7 countries combined. And so we are very honored to have a long-term reauthorization, and also now are being very focused on implementation of this new mandate that you have given us to compete with China and make sure that we are doing all we can to help our workers win deals around the world. Of course, we care about things like default, and so we'll be very prudent with the taxpayer dollar and review things with all the standards that we have. And I will tell you that the rest of the world has told us, we're glad you're back. The U.S. makes the best products in the world, and we are very happy to have this tool to help us buy them. When it comes to coronavirus, we are actively watching. We come in when there are problems in our country for our workers, and so that's why we have things like export credit insurance to help our businesses, and we stand behind all of our products. We did the same after the 2008 financial crisis. Right now, it's too early to predict, but we stand ready and we're monitoring closely.
So are you planning any mitigation efforts based on impact, or are you sort of
if there are claims filed, we will honor those claims to support our small businesses. So, thank you.
Okay,
so to be additive, I mean, I agree with what my partner said. To be additive, I would say sometimes it's access and familiarity with a particular market, particularly when you're talking about frail states or smaller markets. U.S. investors don't have a lot of deals to look at. And so if you're talking about a small entrepreneur, let's say in a small country in Africa, people won't necessarily have familiarity because they don't see a lot of deals. So if we can bridge and takes some risk out of the equation for private businesses, it opens up an on-ramp. So I think sometimes familiarity and access is a limiter. The second thing I'll note as a limiter are structural barriers. And let me use a specific example. In Ethiopia, there are certain structural barriers to investors putting dollars there. And so we're trying to address that even at the prime minister level to say, look, we would love to invest, and so would so much other private capital. How can we help you with technical assistance? And we're working with Treasury on this to potentially adjust some of these things, which would benefit Ethiopia so it could flood the market with private capital. So those are kind of things that often we would see out there. From a coronavirus perspective, a lot of, I would say there's two areas where we're traveling and on-site. One is, let's say, the sourcing of deals, a meeting with governments, et cetera. And then the second one is we have pretty stringent requirements for when we do a deal to ensure that it doesn't violate our environmental standards, human capital standards, and a lot of times, if there's any question in those deals, we go on site to ensure that we're meeting the requirements set forth in Build Act. So what we're trying to do is, one, how much of that can you do over video? Quite frankly, and maybe we change some practices, make lemonade out of lemons a little bit, and say, okay, is that visit necessary? I just did a video conference with the Indonesians the other day, and not everything has to be a physical visit. Some things do. So I think, in addition to normal, protecting our workforce from a travel perspective, we're really trying to push the envelope to see, hey, what can we really do without traveling, if that's the case, and maybe even learn some along the way out of it.
And do you have any specific plans, or are you kind of putting it together?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, so the immediate thing that we did is we said, listen, and just following best practice from USG is only mission critical travel, not to these countries, so following CDC, et cetera. So that was an immediate. And now what we're developing is the specific, okay, what are, if you will, the workarounds in lieu of travel, which would be more, hey, when can we use teleconferencing in this? And I'm having my team also look at, for meeting the deal requirements, what can we actually check off without being physically there? And there are some things, that we will probably need to be physically there, and that might delay a few things. But what do we need to meet to make sure we meet our statutory obligations?
Thank you very much. Okay, I'll turn now to our ranking member, Mr. Rogers.
Mr. Bowler, you were recently in Colombia, I think a couple of times in the last few months. A natural ally of ours, our best partner in the region, and yet Colombia is suffering from various scourges, one of which affects us, and that's the drug production. And now with the trouble in Venezuela, 2,000 Venezuelans a day seeking asylum in Colombia. And it seems to me that, and I think you agree, the ultimate positive answer in Colombia is a strong local economy, small business, small manufacturing, to absorb some of the refugees as well as supplant or undo the drug traffic. Do you agree with that?
I do, Ranking Member. And the way I think about it is, Congress and the Build Act set 3 priorities for DFC. 1, drive development worldwide. 2, advance U.S. Foreign policy and national interests, and 3, protect taxpayer capital. Those are the 3 things I always focus on. And I think Colombia has the potential to be a best-case scenario in all, because from a foreign policy perspective, as you mentioned, we have a domestic issue drug-wise. They have an issue drug-wise. And you mentioned the Venezuelan migrants, the 1.5 million people that are there crossing the border. Investment could alleviate that and should alleviate that done well. But beyond that, where are you talking about investment in that case? The farmers that produce coca are in rural locations that produce coca because they don't have a good economic alternative, because there aren't good roads to transport out coffee, cacao, palm oil. And so to me, it could be a wonderful opportunity to achieve our mandate across development as well as advancing U.S. interests.
Are you having good relations with President Duque?
Yes, I've been quite a bit, and it was a pleasure to see him this past Tuesday at the meetings that he had in the United States.
Does he agree with you on this concept we're talking about?
He does. We spent a lot of time with the administration, obviously, of Colombia. Obviously, something of this magnitude and making a difference has to be done in partnership, so absolutely, Ranking Member.
More than 95% of the world's population is outside America, U.S. 80% of the world's purchasing power outside the U.S. So we're starting from scratch here. There's a pretty difficult odds to deal with. Your agencies have a role in trying to expand U.S. trade with our neighbors around the world. How can your agency, I'm going to ask each of you, how can your agency be a significant part of expanding jobs in America with exports? Keep it short.
Sure. I'll make the comment that of every visit I've met out there with heads of state, the number one top thing I hear repeatedly, 100%, is we did not want to take investment from that autocratic country. We wanted a U.S. alternative, and where were you? And they have a good point. And I think that between the three of us, as well as other government agencies, we are that answer. And I think that means a significant amount for the prosperity of U.S. businesses as we look at those markets. As we invest and create that alternative, people want American companies. People want American businesses. They know what we represent: quality infrastructure, rule of law, transparency. And I feel very good about our prospects together.
EXIM is dedicated to helping our small businesses, and now that we're reauthorized, we've given the world certainty that we're going to be around through 2026. That is key to getting us where we need to go. I had a great experience in your district, sir, visiting a wonderful company called Deco Art Paints in Stamford and spending some time with CEO Stan Clifford. Because now we're good to go for a long tenure, we're able to come in and help the world say, hey, let's take a look at the United States again. It's a lot of work to get our small businesses up and running with exports, and so we are partnering with organizations like the Independent Community Bankers Association and ABA and others, and also working with something called delegated authority, so that our banks on the ground, when you're a small business, you go into your local bank, so they are equipped to help share some of those tools. And of course, now that we're able to do those large transactions over $10 million, we got $40 billion in the pipeline when I showed up as the new chair and reopened EXIM. And so we're thoughtfully going through those applications, and we lost some of those applications. We lost, in fact, $20 billion worth while we were shut. So it's getting the word out, working with each of you, coming and helping the world know that we're back, and the world should pick us.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. USTDA is using its current funding as the tip of the spear to feed the pipelines of the financial entities, EXIM Bank, the DFC, using a small amount of money, as I said in my testimony, to develop the infrastructure and the roadmap to encourage financing. And we have a history of success. I think that the three of us and our agency has worked well together. As I looked and prepared for this testimony, a geothermal power plant that's currently operating in Honduras, financed by the DFC, or the previously OPIC. Just last year, work we did directly with Senegal to help them expand transmission and distribution is in the pipeline for EXIM right now under a $500 million commitment. So that is USTDA's role, is to develop those projects so they can get to financing. And with that, and having USTDA's export mandate, where we're bringing in U.S. technology, U.S. goods and services into the thinking and the process and the development of these projects, is going to best position U.S. companies to succeed internationally.
Yield.
Thank you very much. Now I will yield to Ms. Torres from California.
Thank you, and thank you to all of you for being here. I do want to do a quick follow-up to the coronavirus issue. As you know, we're starting to see an increase here. The County of LA just declared also an emergency. I've learned that the Commerce Department sent out a notice last week that highlighted a change to Chinese regulations, which would make it easier for U.S. companies to export medical supplies that are in critical shortage here in the U.S., such as masks that I have a family of 3 nurses. They can't get masks while they're working front lines in the hospital. I went to 5 different stores over the weekend trying to find hand sanitizer. It's all completely out. So my question is, has the EXIM Bank consulted with the U.S. Coronavirus Task Force to ensure that we are not supporting the exportation of critically limited supplies that our first responders need in order to protect our communities?
Thank you. We take the coronavirus very seriously. EXIM comes in with those very important tools to help our exporters be successful, and we have supported in the past medical equipment.
I'm sorry, just a quick yes or no.
Yes.
Did the Commerce Department and EXIM coordinate to make sure that we're not drawing down on supplies that are not available to U.S. citizens?
So I've
in the homeland?
communicated with all key parts of our administration that we stand ready to be helpful in any way. Again, we need to have applications come into us, and we will promptly review any application to help our exporters get medical equipment to China or other places around the world.
But China is important, but, you know, the most important for us, the priority should be to ensure that we have these medical supplies here at home available to first responders and to American citizens before we begin to export them out, right?
Our mission, though, is a very specific mission to support the export
But
of
our
U.S.
mission,
goods.
we cannot cut our nose in spite, of our face. We have to protect our health needs in the U.S. So the left hand has to communicate with the right hand. And we can't say our priority is to, allow folks to pay $150 for a tiny bottle of hand sanitizer because it isn't available anywhere here in the U.S. Meanwhile, you're working to send these critically needed supplies to China. So
I would be pleased to work with you to take a really hard look at our legislation, anything we can do to help support
I'm just saying,
our
common
country.
sense, let's look at it, and please work with the current working group that the president has set up to ensure that they have all of the supplies that they need before we start exporting them out. In this case, exports are no bueno. In relationship to the Northern Triangle of Central America, I'm very concerned that we have not paid attention to major concerns and issues of public corruption. Every business person that I talk to that is trying to do business in the region, their number one concern is having to pay off local governments and corrupt elected officials in the region in order to do business. So incentivizing by providing the DFC signed an MOU with Guatemala to catalyze $1 billion in private sector investment. Mr. Bowler, what does catalyzing $1 billion in private sector investment mean? And are we exposing our business community to huge losses, potential huge losses, because they are investing in Honduras, a narco government, in Guatemala, a extremely corrupt government?
Congresswoman, I want to note I agree with you on this. And I think, something like a memorandum of understanding, if used correctly, establishes kind of a framework to say this is the potential. But this is the potential if you start really clamping down on corruption. And I went to the inauguration of the Guatemalan president, Giamatti, and he spoke extremely well about it. But action has to follow words.
But his actions have been, to punish NGOs who are trying to promote rule of law and good democracy standards.
Yeah.
So we cannot incentivize these corrupt officials to continue with their corrupt ways that are causing all of the mass exodus in those countries, leaving families, babies at our southern border seeking assistance. We have to provide the political support to the region, and we cannot do that by incentivizing American dollars to corrupt or narco traffickers in the region, even if the narco traffickers are the president and his entire family.
Yeah, look, I 100% agree. I mean, these MOU is not a commitment, and these things are not conditionless or blank checks. So I agree.
The BUILD Act, I had an amendment, and my amendment specifically says that assessments prior to providing funding must occur and must be based on these policies and procedures. The law requires DFC to have these policies and procedures in place. And I hope that you have policies already and that you can follow up. My time is up, so I can't continue to take time from the panel, but I hope that you can follow up with my office.
We will.
And that we can get a briefing exactly on what this MOU is, because it is not, there is nothing transparent about this MOU.
Okay.
And I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Frankel.
First of all, thank you all for being here. Appreciate your efforts. Let me start by saying thank you for mentioning the women's economic initiatives, in which I support. I'm going to have some questions after that, but I just want to say something for the record, which is not meant to, no personal against you all, but I agree with this initiative to empower women economically all over the world, but I just want to say for the record, it is contrary to this effort for the Trump administration to come in here in another forum and ask for cuts in girls' education and women's health care, specifically access to reproductive care. So with that said, I will get to some questions for you. So the BUILD Act, we said that for DFC to prioritize the reduction of gender gaps and maximize development impact by working to improve women's economic opportunities throughout the DFC's portfolio. There was another provision in the BUILD Act that calls for gender desegregated data. So I'd like you to, if you could, comment on each of those areas, on how you're moving forward. And then one other question I have on this regard is the OPIC staff had been looking into EDGE certification, a global certification standard for gender equality, and I'm wondering whether or not you're continuing to explore that. So those three questions, if you could respond.
Sure. And I'm sorry, could you repeat the first one again?
Okay. The first one, in the BUILD Act, requires the prioritization, I'll read it specifically, to prioritize the reduction of gender gaps and maximize development impact by working to improve women's economic opportunities.
Yeah. So on the first one, obviously, 2X and our collaboration with WGDP has been a huge focus. We set up a goal initially in the first year of $1 billion of investment. We exceeded that. I think we were 1.3, 1.4. We then set up.
Where are you investing? How are you investing?
Yeah, all over the place. I mean, let me give you a specific example. When I was in India last week, I visited one of our investments called Sitara, which is focused on affordable housing for women, where we're backing up mortgages for women that are working mothers, and so got to see, this right in place. You've got a number of different initiatives focused on rural communities. One of the things I find with women in emerging economies and rural is that it's very difficult for them to leave and work, and so some of the technology initiatives we're looking at, for example, coding, if there's internet access, can be a really effective way to improve employment on the women's side. But our position has been, how can you be a successful country if you haven't empowered half of your workforce? And so that's something that we've pushed very hard. Your second question, I think, really relates to are monitoring and reporting back, and you'll see that as per the BUILD Act. We see those requirements. That's what we're building toward. And then your third question around EDGE certification, we did get EDGE certification, and I actually was looking at the numbers a couple days ago. Not only we got it last year, but our focus on the women's and minority side has resulted in a much higher increase, actually, in amount of women. One thing that I noticed when I came on board is that we were over 50% women, but at the very senior level, that was not the case. Our management team has greatly expanded toward women, and even since the year of our EDGE certification. So I think we're very much moving in the right direction, and we have an increased commitment there.
I think maybe you answered the question, is whether you're going to actively work to identify partners who prioritize gender equality. Yes.
It's one of the considerations, actually, we look at. In our evaluation of deals, there's a 2X focus. And when we do our IQ score, being women's focused increases your development score, which would greatly enhance our probability of funding the deal.
Okay. I want to thank you, and I thank you for your commitment to that. And not to be sarcastic or rude, I just want to say, as I conclude my remarks, that the women who you're getting mortgages for, they need access to contraception. And I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Franklin. Now I will turn to Ms. Meng.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Ms. Franco asked most of my concerns. My first question was about women's empowerment too, especially women's access to credit. Just wanting to make sure, and if you have any insight on how we are making sure that, especially with the 2X initiative, that women's access to credit will be institutionalized, made permanent, dependent, regardless of who is, in charge. So that's my first question, and I'll just go to my second question, a totally different subject, but climate. Climate change poses great risks to the ability of many low and lower middle income countries to fulfill development goals. Although the Trump administration has announced that the U.S. will leave the Paris Climate Agreement, to what extent will the DFC help countries implement their nationally determined commitments to international conventions? And two, in 2017, despite having strengthened its environmental and social policies, OPIC financed 4 oil and gas projects, which collectively represented over 2.3 million tons of CO2 per year in emissions, or a 14% increase in annual emissions in these countries. Will the DFC continue to finance projects that rely on fossil fuels?
So on the first question, obviously I spoke about it a little bit. The other thing I'll just note on the side is the visibility that Ivanka Trump has given the 2X initiative, I think actually has mattered a lot, because I know at the head of state level, when we meet with countries, they will very much highlight their women's initiative. And so that focus has made it a constant thought process. And I think that other countries know that as they look to ally with the United States, this is an important consideration that we look at. And I think it started to become really institutionalized. I think that's really positive. And I think women's access to credit and financing limits on those are not acceptable and really hinder. So a lot of our focus and investing has been, how do you get out and remove those barriers from a financing perspective?
Right.
Those
are all positive, and just wanting to make sure, like in a future administration, that the priorities would be the same, even if the administration is different.
I think the nice thing, I think it feels like this focus on women is becoming institutionalized. And so I think that is really nice. I think especially as Congress thinks about codifying WGDP, the 2X brand, et cetera, it feels like it's settling in, and if you will, it feels very American and continuing, and not a partisan issue, which is really nice.
Thank you.
Your second question around the 2017 deals, obviously I wasn't there in 2017, but I will tell you what I am focused on, which is renewable energy. Over 80% of our deals are in that space, and anything that is not renewable, based on the guidelines that BUILD Act that Congress gave us, the bar's high. It's very high. It's looked at with increased scrutiny if it's not in that category. So that is my general commitment. I'll tell you, I'd much rather do a deal renewable than not. And so it will face a higher bar based on the statutory requirements that we have in BUILD Act.
Thank you. I yield back.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me ask a couple of questions of all of you. In terms of, my first question has to do with the utilization of minority-owned businesses. As I travel throughout the world, I'm always looking to see what partnerships and what contracts where there are business arrangements with U.S. firms. I never see African-American companies, I never see Hispanic companies, and I never see Asian Pacific American companies. How do you all, first of all, when you do business with American companies as partners in any of your programs, how do you address this? And I'd like to also ask if we could get a report back with regard to the utilization, the partnerships, the arrangements you have with minority-owned businesses disaggregated by African American, Asian Pacific American, and Hispanic businesses. Mr. Hardy.
Thank you. I would start, I think I'll start at the big macro level, which is the small business, and then we'll get down to the micro level. USTA is proud. We have over 60% of our FAR contracts are committed to small business. And when we drive down deeper, a significant portion of those are dedicated or in the 8A program that oftentimes are designed for minority-owned business, Hispanic-owned businesses. We can give you a clear breakout, but a significant amount of our FAR contracts are set aside for that 8A program, and our overall number is over 60% of all contracts that USTDA funds under the FAR is small business.
Okay, I'd like to see that breakdown. I'm a former 8A contractor myself, and it was very difficult as an African-American woman to break in. And so I would like to see, again, the data disaggregated based on the good work that you're doing in terms of the U.S. trade and development.
We would be happy to, and we've the 8A program has been very successful for us to get companies, small companies that have, and as you know, as an 8A, former 8A, having that mentorship that 8A program provides to small businesses has been very helpful for us to get not only smaller businesses started, but help them get the capacity to expand longer term.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Chairwoman.
So I'm really taking this program that we have at XM called Women and Minority-Owned Businesses to the next level. I love it. I believe in it. We've got a great staff, and we know that it takes a lot of dedicated staff time to ensure that we're reaching out, especially as Director Hardy mentioned with our small businesses. So in FY2019, we did $441 million in authorizations for women and minority-owned businesses. And we're going to increase our staff that focus on that at XM over the next few months. We're going to go from 11 to 13 of our staff. And I want to just touch on some of the groups you asked us to identify who our partners are. And so I've partnered with the Minority Business Development Agency, the National Minority Supplier Development Council, Women's Business Enterprise National Council, the U.S. Hispanic Chamber, and the National Veterans Business Council. But really look forward to doing more outreach, coming with you and doing that. And as one of the 100 women leaders in STEM, I know that we need to do all we can at all levels in the private sector as well as in government. So I'm pleased to say that of our 373-person workforce at XM, 46% identify as non-white, and 53% of our workforce is female.
Sure. Thank you very much. And I'd like to get a report back, though, with, again, disaggregated, African-American, Hispanic, Asian Pacific American.
Those numbers. Thank you.
You very much. Okay.
Vice Chairman, gotcha on the report. Happy to do it. I think two things should be additive. One is I think when we invest in countries in the United States, we have great diaspora populations. I mentioned Ethiopia before. right? You have a great diaspora population in Virginia, really close. Caribbean population in the United States. On the Western Hemisphere, Latin American population in the United States, which I think you have people that have moved from those countries, which could be great opportunities, and I think that will be phenomenal. The second thing is Kim and I share different reasons, Kim being newly reauthorized, my agency being newly created, probably some opportunity to go out and to let U.S. businesses know who we are. So I think it's probably helpful, and we could do a tour together, but happy to do it together with members in districts to advertise this too, because we can always do better and we're new. So I think that would be helpful.
Thank you very much. And again, whatever data you have, I'd like
Understood.
that back.
Yep.
But I would also suggest that you look at the Tri-Caucus, the Black, Hispanic, and Asian Pacific American Caucus, as you move out
to do that.
raise awareness about this. Let me ask you, Mr. Hardy, let me ask you about your agency. Now, the Access to Africa initiative, that has helped facilitate transactions that build sub-Saharan Africa's infrastructure using American goods and services. And as we know, in the president's budget, there's it zeroes out TDA operations. So if TDA operations cease, what do you anticipate will happen, first of all, to ongoing projects in sub-Saharan Africa? But secondly, and again, as I move over through the continent of Africa quite a bit every year, I understand the investments that China is making. I see this each and every day. And if, in fact, we want to be competitive and want to have a larger footprint there for all of the reasons you stated, why in the world would we zero out operations that would help U.S. companies and help ongoing projects in Africa?
Let me start with the ongoing projects. We have worked closely internally within the agency and OMB to manage how we would draw down the agency, draw down staffing, and the long-term projects, because you're right, those do take a long time for our investments to come forward to financing. And that would include potentially having to move some of our authorizations and commitments to another government agency in the out years if in fact the Congress and administration move forward with closing USTDA. What would it mean if USTDA was eliminated? I think that there would be a hole, but U.S. companies would be able to step into that hole. It's a challenge, as I talked about in my testimony, and there is a very competitive market. You have players that are not playing by the rules, and companies are suffering. U.S. companies are suffering greatly. Companies in your district, companies around the country, and there'd be a hole if we weren't there. But it would be a hole that it's the budget request says that U.S. companies could step into.
I think it would be a deeper hole just in terms of the geopolitical dynamics that this message would send in terms of the U.S. versus China. I mean, I think that this is something I hope this committee will look at and address. Let me ask you, Mr. Bowler, the relationship between the African Development Bank, I think it's 54 million requests for the first 8 installments, and the Millennial Challenge Corporation, I think it's 800 million. It's down from 905 million in the past 2 years. What's the relationship between the African Development Bank and the MCC look like? I have visited the African Development Bank a few times, and I think it's doing quite an amazing job with minimal resources. And so I'm trying to understand what's taking place now in terms of the partnerships and this reduction in funding.
Understood. So, Vice Chairman, I'm not 100% sure related to MCC and the African Development Bank. I know that we've looked to partner with them at DFC, so we established kind of a memorandum of understanding to look at joint projects in Africa together. I met Dr. Agasina a number of times and really think they're aligned in our view, and I always like partnering with local partners. But I couldn't comment I wouldn't want to comment in detail on MCC in that area because I'm not as
well. Maybe there isn't a relationship between. I mean, there's so many different agencies.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to see how the coordination and collaborations take place.
Yeah.
On specifically on the continent of Africa, since it's such a neglected continent.
What I could reflect on, if it's helpful, Vice Chairwoman, is how we work with MCC within Africa, or would that be helpful?
Yeah, that would be helpful. And also, just in terms of your background,
Yeah.
you know, in business, it's a very difficult region in
Yes.
Africa. And so some countries in Africa receive the private investments, others receive little or none.
Right.
And so I'm glad you're there, but it's a challenge.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to try to stay on top of this with all of these agencies, because I think we have a window of opportunity now, but we're losing that
Yeah.
window very quickly.
And you correctly identified, Vice Chairman, around China and the issue there, which is, as you know, very real. So I'll reflect a little bit on MCC and then what we're trying to do, not only in bigger countries that are known like South Africa, but other countries that are not as developed. Within MCC, when MCC enters into a compact, it can take a while. There are a lot of requirements. And so one way that Sean, who runs MCC, and I have looked at working together is beforehand investing to help countries reach that threshold potential so that they could enter a compact, because there's a lot that can happen before that. And then even once they enter a compact, because his money is grant money, how could we surround and work together? And again, I think we're best when we work together, and I know that we have meetings, actually us with MCC all the time around, okay, now we're looking at this, how could we have XM come in, and how could we do technical assistance before they get to that threshold? So I think that's a really good way we can work together. And I think you're right, our timing is good because we're finally operational, and there's a lot of focus on it given development in China. And then the only other thing I'll note is I very much view our focus because we are a development agency, first and foremost, is to enter into fragile states and developing states, and not just where it's easiest. And so that will continue to be our clear mandate, because that's what's been given to me by Congress, and I'll follow that mandate.
Great. And my final question, did you have something to say?
Hey, thank you. If I could just follow up on Africa, I want to assure you that Africa is not the neglected region. I spent over 20 years working in Africa and have had seen success after success after success of USTDA making that early investment and how it's transformed people's lives, whether it be a digital inclusion in the townships outside of Cape Town, the deployment of what is now the subsea, undersea fiber optic cable that's bringing broadband access from the southern tip of South Africa all the way up to Egypt, and the transformative impact that that's having. And just this past year at the CCA conference, we launched an initiative called Access Africa that's designed to take those successes and expand our investment in ICT infrastructure to ensure that the IT infrastructure is best being able to help Africans across the continent.
Yes, Chairman Reed.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chairman. I just want to underscore how committed XM also is to Sub-Saharan Africa. Congress has asked us to prioritize Sub-Saharan Africa. And back in September, we stood up a Sub-Saharan Africa Advisory Committee. They sent a report to Congress with some wonderful recommendations. My fellow board member, Judith Pryor, I've asked her to take on that as one of our key objectives. And just so you know, we've reopened XM. We approved the largest deal in the history of XM last year, and that was to the country of Mozambique. A $5 billion deal that will transform the country. And because XM was reopened, originally China and Russia were in the deal, and they got kicked out because the Mozambique government and those in Mozambique wanted to buy our U.S. goods and services. So that's going to support 16,400 jobs across the country. And we're working really hard. I don't know if you know Flory Lazaire, who heads the Corporate Council on Africa, but she's on our advisory committee, and I'm going with her to Africa in a couple months. As soon as I was sworn in, President Trump asked me to lead his delegation to the swearing in of Cyril Ramaphosa in Pretoria, South Africa, and it was such an honor to be there and sit down with all of the potential business leaders, actual business leaders, but for our potential business deals that could happen now with Africa. So we've done preliminary commitments in Cameroon and Senegal to help some small businesses be successful there. And I really hope that we get to celebrate something from your district to Africa as well. So we'll work hard on that.
Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Bowler, on thinking out of the box and really coming up with new ideas, this new form of financing, hybrid financing, it's intended to be like equity but treated like a loan under the Federal Credit Reform Act. Is it equity? Is it not equity? Is it another form of? Seems like it's another form of debt financing, which OPIC has been doing for some time. Can you kind of drill down just a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think when you think about the difference between debt and equity, there's a whole spectrum of different products within there, and so kind of some of the concept here is, and really ultimately, what is the difference between debt and equity? Because they can look like each other. A lot of times, it's where you sit in the stack, where first money comes out, your governance rights is common, and whether there's redemption. Those tend to be the three differences. And so as you move towards senior lending, you move up the stack, mezzanine lending, more senior loans. And so the idea is really to be able to offer a spectrum of different products that fit the right situation. There are times, for example, when the senior lending stack, if you will, the mezzanine stack, that's a riskier layer. So you won't find private market willing to do that, but they would take a certain stack. There are times where equity is really appropriate. I'll give you an example. If you're a small entrepreneur in Africa, like we're talking about, saddling that entrepreneur with debt, not probably counter to what we would want to do in terms of. So I think the idea to your point out of the box is really to have a spectrum of products so that you can use the right thing for the right situation.
Okay, well, you have a development mandate though, right?
Absolutely.
And so this is more associated with more of a business model.
I actually, what I would say on this is, to me, it's not business model. It's using the right product for the right situation. So by way of example, if you're using a riskier debt product that private market won't take, you're enabling private market to do deals to drive development. This equity example, you're enabling entrepreneurs that you don't want to saddle with debt. So when I think about our financial products, we're always using them to drive a development purpose. That's our mission.
So are you testing it, or are you using it without, say, modeling it?
There's nothing we won't enter into that's not heavily modeled and then evaluated not only by our internal credit process, which is an independent credit process, all the way through, but then over by OMB as well. So everything we do, there's no, it's always a refined, specific process that is career-led from that perspective, too, because I think it's critical that we have an independent view from a credit perspective, and then it goes over to OMB, and they can be sharp, they have sharpened pencils there. So.
Keep us posted on how this is going. I'm very interested in this, making sure that it's going to do what it's supposed to do.
Absolutely, that makes sense.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me thank the panel for your time. It's been very informative and interesting, and glad to see you here. And any reports or any requests that members made, we look forward to receiving those in a hopefully expedited fashion. So this concludes today's hearing. The Subcommittee on State, Foreign Operations, and Related Program stands adjourned. Thank you again.
Okay.